Hey everybody. uh, so, love. Let's talk about love. Love is, well, everywhere. And we overlook it. Because we overlook it, because it's so close, it's more abundant than the air. It is the base element from which everything else is derived. And because it's so plentiful, because it's so free, it goes overlooked. It goes taken for granted. And we end up looking for other things that aren't love, that aren't very loving. That is, we go looking for secondary manifestations of consciousness, that is, contracted consciousness, projected from thought, invented through the medium of thought, that is filtered, fragmented, fractured, broken by the medium of thought, because those are things that can be grabbed onto. Those are things that can be held, captured, and therefore controlled. And the moment you have your first experience as a child of being unloved, of being uncared for, of being unwanted, then you have, because of the nature of that experience of love being lost, it initiates a whole journey of trying to find a love that cannot be lost. And because the experience of losing love then turns the love, what you remember of love, into a memory and therefore into an experience. The experience of losing love creates the experience or the memory of the experience of having had love, and therefore that sets the whole polarity of love and unlove into motion, and therefore the journey of having to go and seek love and find love, and therefore the associations of what love is and what love is not based on sensory experience and gratification of the mind. So when that whole thing is set in motion, it creates a very particular feeling of what love is to me, and I've lost it, and now I've got to go get it again. And it's almost the same, it's always the same general thing for everybody, right? A feeling of security and acceptance and affection and pleasantness, not being hurt. But the way that people relate to that specifically may be a little different here and a little different there. There's always somebody else, many other people that have the same particulars and specifics as you. So there's no need to actually feel desperately alone in that, but that is the feeling. Because when love is not felt, when there's no awareness of love, what is left is this feeling of desperation and loneliness and being essentially cast out of the kingdom of heaven, being cast out of the presence of God, being cast out of the presence of the source of creation, right? When you feel that loss of love initially from the parent who's supposed to be the guardian, the one that has you in this protective bubble, it feels as if God has kicked you out of divine protection. And that's the experience that sets off what we call in psychological language the ego, or the feeling of the separate I am, the isolated individual, right? The one that is made of thought and memory, which is desire. And the base of all desire is to get back to heaven, to get back to love, to get back to that feeling of oceanic, all-absorbing, all-containing perfection. Contentedness, peace, because where there's that love, that unconditional love, there's peace. And because there's the experience of losing that or being separated from that by some traumatic event of not receiving or of being battered, however extreme it is. In some cases, it's a positive event. When I say positive, I mean an outward expression in the terms of some kind of physical abuse, right? Or another kind of expressed form of abuse, or it's a negative experience. Negative, I'm using that term in the polarity, in the sense of something not being there, something being removed, right? The absence of something. So either an outwardly expressed, which would be, we're using the word positive, and positively expressed, act of violence, or a negatively expressed act of violence in the form of negligence or withdrawal or lack, right? And so then that creates the particular pattern, the ego structure, and all egos are the same. This one might have a different face, and that one might have a different mask and different clothing, and on and on and on. But the mechanics of psyche are universal in every body. But the trap is that everybody thinks that their psyche, therefore their wound, their trauma is particular. Because for some person, they say, my trauma was my mom did this, and for somebody else, my dad did that, and for somebody else, whoever, whatever, doesn't matter. And so everyone has this idea that their trauma is particular to them, and therefore nobody else understands their trauma. It's not true. Trauma is trauma. Separation is separation. Division is division. Lack is lack. Fragmentation is fragmentation. Done. If you don't, and part of the trap of being wounded, of being in trauma, is not seeing that. And because you don't see it, you stay stuck in it. Because you refuse to come out of the shell until you find someone to relate to in terms of your trauma, and you never deeply feel that anybody can really relate to you, because the trap of trauma is the belief that you're the only one that ever can understand it or know it, and therefore no one else can ever understand it, therefore you can never relate to anybody, therefore you're some lone freak. And therefore, when you do find someone who you kind of sort of relate to, you develop what's called a trauma bond or a wound bond, which basically means, look, you ever had like a skin rash, like road rash or a tattoo or something, and you end up getting, a piece of cloth stuck to it? As it's scabbing, as it's still secreting the plasma, what happens? The cloth or something else sticks to it, and then it becomes adhesed and you have to peel it away. So what a wound bond is, what a trauma bond is essentially, let's say I had road rash, or I have an open wound here on my arm, and so do you in the same spot. And we go, oh, look, our wounds are the same size, in the same place, in the same shape. So good, it's a perfect Band-Aid, right? Because then we can, And so then I stick mine to yours, you stick yours to mine, and so it acts as a perfect cover. Because our wounds are in the same place, same size, same shape. Some people do wonky things where it's the same size and shape but different place, and then they get into weird contortions with each other. But let's say both of our wounds are same size, same shape right there on the arm. Then we press our arms together, our wounds are now covered, and now we're walking hand in hand, and it feels so nice as we can relate. But now you can't move. Because to actually regain your independence and your mobility and sovereignty as a being requires that you rip that away. And the longer you keep that wound there, then it starts to kind of, well, it doesn't actually heal, but it sticks. And the pain of ripping that apart is just, now if you're willing to just do it, it's done within a moment. But most people have a difficult time doing anything that hurts, let alone not just the physical separation that would entail, the pain thereof, but also the mental and emotional and energetic pain of that kind of separation. So that's what's meant by a wound bond, a trauma bond. It's not some cute psychological thing where it's like, oh yeah, you got hurt that way? Oh yeah, me too, let's be friends. That's a cute little romantic ideation of what that is. It's not what it is. A wound bond, a trauma bond, is when I put my wound to your wound to create a fake band. We use each other as a Band-Aid. And that means that eventually, if you're going to live a sovereign life, it has to be ripped apart, and it's fucking painful. So that's what happens when the human experience, what we call the human condition, which is the conditioned mind, which is brought about by trauma, which is what creates the ego, the personality structure, which is simultaneously an attempt to keep the wound covered as well as to try to address the wound, that is to try to bring in what we feel is lacking by means of the personality in the world, but rarely does it actually bring in what's wanted. It ends up just bringing in more of what caused the initial pain and the wound and the trauma in the first place. And so this is the essential problem that's fallen in our laps. We were born, and here it is, boom, right in our laps. What do we do with it? So if you've come to this point and you're really serious about okay, what do I do with it? Well, the first thing you see is that you have to be alone. That doesn't mean that you put yourself in a life sentence of isolation. It just means you see that for the time being, for however long it takes, I've got to sit alone. So I can look at the way that the mind works. So I can look at the way that this whole system of trauma circulating as thought, as memory, as ego, as psyche, as personality is flowing, how it's functioning, how it relates with, how it interacts with itself, how it relates, its pattern of movement, and how it relates to the outside world. Because as long as it's there, but it implies, obviously, is unconsciousness. Because if you knew that you were setting yourself up for even more pain and hurt just very imminently down the road, would you do it? If you're a glutton for punishment, but not if you're actually trying to be better. If you're actually trying to heal, you wouldn't do it. So if what you actually want is to heal, which means you actually want to come back to your original nature, which means you actually want love, you're ready to go for love actually and not just skirt around it and, lament that you lost love, or that feeling of being loved by the universe or the powers that be, the source of creation, right? There's that period where you just simply want to lament it and rebel and fuck you and da-da-da-da-da, whatever. But then at some point you got to get serious about actually wanting to come back to it, to want to return to your natural state. And so finally, when you're serious about wanting to return to your natural state, that means you have to be willing to see what is just the way it is. And when you see what is just the way it is, what you end up seeing is that as long as you continue to live as that traumatized person, all that can happen is a repeat of the same old, same old, same old. There's no way out of that trap. And so the only way is to go through a rebirth. That is to completely let go of the old, which means forgiveness. There's no way out of forgiveness, baby. I'm sorry. There's no way out of forgiveness. There's no way out of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not... See, you have no power to let anybody else off the hook. And no one has the power to keep you on the hook. You only have the power to let yourself off the hook. That's forgiveness. And there's no way to let yourself off the hook as long as you're trying to keep somebody else on the hook. Inwardly. You don't actually have the power to keep somebody else on the hook because they can release themselves. But if you want someone else to be on the hook, you will stay on the hook too. The only way to let yourself off the hook is to let the whole world off the hook. And that doesn't mean foregoing a true sense of responsibility. But responsibility does not mean guilt. It does not mean fault. Responsibility means your capacity to act immediately according to what is appropriate, what's necessary now, in this moment. That's responsibility. It means care. It means love. It means affection. It means compassion. It means intelligence. It means consciousness. It doesn't mean that you keep a scorecard against all the wickedness that somebody else has done. That's not responsibility. Responsibility is not guilt. It's not blame, it's not fault, it's not shame. It means being willing to dynamically meet what is arising in the moment as it's arising and to respond accordingly, appropriately, actually. And that can't be done as long as the brain is still functioning from trauma. It's not possible. And so the only way to return to love, and the strategy developed by the ego, by the personality, was a manipulative one to try to get back what it thought it lost, but the only way to get back there is to drop the strategy. And so when that very experience first happened of love being taken away, now if you look at it, the wisdom in that is the perception that what love actually is cannot be taken away. Human beings can alternate in their behavior toward you, and that comes from their wound. And that's how wound is transmitted. That's how trauma is transmitted. Trauma is a virus. The ego is a virus. The personality as defense mechanism and as an attempt to try to get what one thinks is the object of one's desire in the world is a defense mechanism, which is a virus transmitted not only vertically down through the generations, but also laterally through society. And so that's why it's called I don't use this word very often when I speak, but the so-called matrix, right? Matrix, the rows and the columns. And the boxes that are there are called cells, right? It's rather fitting as a metaphor, as an analogy. But it functions like that, the personality matrix. And it's trauma. It's all trauma. It's trauma, 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 trauma. And trauma is violence. Violence is trauma, which isn't love. And so when there's that experience, and then one is trying to use a mechanism created by trauma to move through trauma, or to become untraumatized, it can never work. Trauma only begets trauma. Violence only begets violence. You can't commit violence against violence and expect love to come out of it. You can't bring trauma to trauma and expect love to come out of it. You just get more trauma. You can't declare war on war and expect peace. Warfare on warfare begets more warfare. So finally, if there's a deep sincerity, a deep desire to actually want to return to love, to return to the natural state, obviously then what has to be done is the false self has to be let go of. Which means the experience of being abandoned has to be faced completely and accepted. Because what you are truly and actually can never be abandoned. And to be able to see the difference, to be able to see the difference between the true self, the real self, the abiding eternal self, and the body-mind complex, that's the gift of consciousness. That's the gift of awareness. And it's not to diminish or to deny the experience that has been undergone, but it's to put all experience, not selectively, to put all experience, which means all thought and memory, in its proper place, which is not in relationship. The minute you try to recreate or redo or restructure relationship through the vehicle of thought and memory, you're simply playing chess, which means you're playing a game of war. Relationship first is one's relationship to consciousness, one's relationship to nature, to the natural world, which means you have to see what is your relationship to God. When I say God, I mean consciousness. I don't mean the idea of God created by this religion or that religion. Put all that aside. I'm talking about the source of everything. What is your relationship with the mystery of life, with life itself? Let's say that. What is your relationship with life itself? That has to be looked at. And that is something that's beyond words. You have to sit quietly and really mean it. Go into yourself and look, what is my relationship with what is? Actually, not according to psychology or to the psyche or to some philosophy or some ideology or something somebody else told me or according to this book or that book or some other tome. That's not what I mean. I mean empty completely your mind of all thoughts and notions of who you think you are, of who you think the world is, of what you think the divine is, of what you think the sacred means, and simply come up to it in the raw and discover directly for yourself what it is. Unfiltered. And that takes total fearlessness because you have to face the primal fear of death, of dying, of being separate from love, of separate from the source of creation for all of eternity, which depending upon your conditioning may mean facing the fear of eternal damnation, eternal hell. It may mean facing eternal separation from your security unit, from your family group, from your friends, from your culture, from your society, whatever. That has to be faced. It has to be faced. There's no way around that. You can't bypass that. You have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, as it's been called. I don't mean to bring in that religious reference necessarily. I mean, it's a good one. It's a good metaphor. But you've got to walk through that. You've got to face that. You have to walk through hell. Anyway, you're already there, aren't you? As long as you're living in trauma, you're already in hell. So you face it. You've got to keep walking through it. Don't pretend you're not. And because you've got to walk through hell to get to heaven. You've got to. There's no way out of that. Because to know consciousness, you must know unconsciousness. You can't know consciousness without knowing unconsciousness. Unconsciousness is unconsciousness precisely because it's unconscious. That means it doesn't know itself, let alone consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness because it knows itself. It's conscious. It knows itself and it knows unconsciousness. You see? So unconsciousness is a lose-lose situation. Consciousness is a win-win situation. Right? So when you see that clearly, you see there's no contest, there's no choice. And that's why consciousness is choiceless. There's the appearance of choice to make a choice. And then the appearance of choice is necessary. It's a necessary appearance. The appearance of choice has to be there. But finally, when you see clearly what consciousness is and what unconsciousness is, there's no choice. Now, you can make the choice to go to unconsciousness once you see it clearly as distinct from consciousness, but if you really see consciousness and you really resolve in you to want love and nothing but love, there's no contest, there's no choice. You go right into the light, you go right into consciousness. There's no contest, there's no question, because you stop fucking with yourself. And so the willingness to heal, the willingness to step into love, to step into truth, to step into joy, to step into healing, to consciousness is to stop fucking with yourself. No matter what anybody else around you is doing, the whole world can be fucking with themselves. And look, largely the world is fucking with itself. Most people fuck with themselves. But you have the choice to stop fucking with yourself and to stop doing it right now. That's the gift. That's the invitation. That's the gift of consciousness. You can stop fucking with yourself, which means you're no longer subject to playing some game that somebody else has decided that you're going to play. You don't have to be anybody's victim. You don't have to be the victim of life, of God, of nature, of the universe, of some cosmic joke, because you're not. But that's the narrative that keeps you imprisoned. And if you want proof for that narrative being real, you can find all the proof you want. And the whole world will be happy to corroborate that story in some form or another, because everyone's playing the part of being the eternal victim of something. But that's only a psychological narrative. When you come into the realization of consciousness, of the soul, of the true self, what you see is that there's only that, irrepressibly, uncontaminatably, uncorruptibly, irrevocably, inseparable from love, inseparable from the source of creation. The soul and the source of creation are one. What you are is totally and irrevocably in union with all that is and with its own source. And when you know that actually, which you can only discover when you're willing to put down the psychological story, the narrative, nothing can take that away from you no matter what. Anything can happen to you. The body can be battered and beaten and it doesn't change a thing. No matter what happens to you, once you know this, nothing can take it from you. Nothing changes. The body will go through its transformation, whatever might happen to the body. Thought can do whatever the hell thought does. But when you know this and you rest in this, it's done. And then the body itself comes to a sense of ease and stability. The mind itself comes to a sense of ease and stability. It's not a promise of any kind of physical changing, but it is a guarantee of knowing beyond knowing what is eternally secure, which is never thought. The mind is never secure. The body is never secure. But what is secure is that which is eternal, that which is the real you, which is inseparable from anything. And that's your birthright to know. And the world that we've been living in for so many thousands of years now has been set up on the very institutional basis of keeping that awareness blocked from conscious awareness. Because you can't run a thrall world, a world of enthrallment, where there is consciousness reigning supreme. We've lived in a world which has thrived on unconsciousness for thousands and thousands and thousands of years now. And it's time to step into the light of consciousness. Because consciousness is the next evolutionary trajectory of the human being. There's nowhere else to go. All physical expansion has been had. Now it's time for inner expansion. And this is consciousness, which is love, which is peace, which is joy unbound and unparalleled. You need nothing for it. No drugs, no physical stimulation, nothing. And nothing can confer it, nothing can give it away. It's a gift from consciousness itself. Consciousness is its own gift to itself. And the grace, the capacity to receive the grace, is the willingness to be receptive, the willingness to allow. And this means the union of what you call the masculine and the feminine. The union of the whole being. What was once considered to be two polar opposites is actually seen to be one whole. No division. No division. No division between people, between masculine and feminine, between black and white, between this nation and that nation, this hemisphere and that hemisphere. That's all psychological projection. It's all the invention of thought. And the only place it could lead to is destruction, corruption, violence. So if you would know love, if you would know the true nature of who you are, you must be willing to go beyond the mind. And that means facing the fear of all fears, death. And if you're willing to meet death, not concluding anything about death, because you've been told all kinds of stories about death, but if you're willing to meet death and face death as it could be, because death is not out there, nor is it back there. Death is right here. And if you're willing to face death now, immediately in this moment, then you're willing to face love and life. Because death, love, and life are one. They're not separate. And to know love is to know death. To know that everything that is physical, everything that is materially manifest has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But that which is eternal has no beginning and no end. And therefore is constantly renewed, constantly renewed, constantly renewed. Love is always fresh, because love is not the past. Love is not based on memory, it's not based on thought. Therefore not based on emotion. We refer to a particular kind of emotional attraction or feeling as love. That's a very small part of the manifestation of the human mind, body, thought, emotion complex. Love is beyond all thought, beyond all emotion, beyond all memory. It's beyond all particulars of manifestation, and all particulars of manifestation come from it and return to it. And to know it as that unconditional, eternal beingness, which is beyond everything, you know it can never be taken from you. It is what you are, and you bring it to the table. And it manifests however it needs to manifest in any given situation. It's totally adaptable. It's completely dynamic and fluid. And totally here, totally present, taking care. And so it's no small thing. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't matter what happens in the world of the sensory perception. That will always change. You can't keep the physical, the material, the time-bound world static. You can't keep it arrested. It must move. But love itself is completely still, completely calm, completely at ease, completely at peace, and capable of being at total rest and of expressing complete dynamism without wasting energy. Because it's not attachment. It's not, so therefore there's no jealousy, there's no insecurity, there's no envy, no anger. Love is peace. It is truth. It is ecstasy. It's joy. And it doesn't depend on anything being there or not being there. It simply is of itself so. And the realization of it, once realized, can never be taken away. And that realization can be checked again, again, and again, and again, and again. And every time it's checked, it rings true. It comes back as being the only thing that is eternal. Nothing else. Nothing else. And this love is consciousness itself. It is God itself. And it's totally inseparable from what you are. Know this, and you're free. This is freedom. Freedom from all compulsion, freedom from all mechanical compulsion, mechanical desire, being on a track, blindly, unconsciously following some programming that's been put into you by fear as trauma. And so this is about being whole. This is about coming home to wholeness, going totally beyond trauma, seeing trauma for what it is, and not building some narrative, because as long as you build a narrative out of the trauma and continue telling the story every day, you're stuck in it. Stuck in it, totally and completely stuck in it. So if you would, and if that's your choice, that's the meaning of free will. If you want to stay stuck in hell, you have every right to stay stuck in hell. But we've been living in a hell realm. We've been creating hell on this earth in this beautiful paradise for far too long. And it's unconscionable. It's not okay, if I may say so. We've been doing it for far too long. Look, you can do it if you'd like. But if you continue doing it, you have no right to complain about it because you're conscious of it. You can't make hell and then complain about hell. So if you want heaven to be on earth instead of hell to be on earth, then you must step into consciousness. You must step into that light. And tell the truth. Tell the truth about it. Don't pretend that somebody else has put you in hell. You put yourself in hell. And that's the religion that you practice. See, everybody has a religion. Religion doesn't mean this tradition or that tradition. Religion means what you go to, what you contemplate, what you ponder, what you worship, what you give yourself to every day. And if the altar you've built in your mind is one of fear, then you worship fear. You worship unconsciousness. That's idol worship. So you are what you worship. You are what you surrender to. If you surrender to fear, you are fear. If you surrender to love, you are love. And surrendering to love means surrendering to no control. Anyway, you don't control fear either, but you have the illusion, the delusion that you can control it. You think you can control demons, and then you realize they're controlling you, they're dragging you. But if you're wise, you see, no illusion. So surrender to that which is truly in control, which is the source of everything, which is love, peace. And then you're really swimming in the big ocean, not some little kiddie pool that is pretending to be the big boys club. No, you go and you really enter the big ocean. And that takes all the guts in the world. It takes every last ounce of courage you've got. Because it requires your mind, body, heart, soul, everything. Unlike the other, which says, give me your soul and you go ahead and keep your body. That thing that says, give me your soul and you keep your body, it can't have your soul. Nothing can have your soul because your soul is already inseparable from the source of creation. The source of creation already owns that because it is that. You are that. You can't give it or sell it to anything. And so when you play that game of put that here and put that over here, you're just fucking with yourself. You're lying. You're playing a silly little stupid game. Done. Get over with it. Get over it. It's silly. It's beneath your dignity as a being. So the only thing to do is to surrender to the source of everything. Not be in the way that some tradition says you have to do it. If that speaks to you, fine. But ultimately, you have to go even beyond that tradition. If you have a method of meditation, of prayer, of anything, you ultimately have to go beyond that method. If you would come to rest in the truth of consciousness and the truth of what is. And then you can do any method you'd like because you enjoy it, because it's celebratory, because it's deeply fun. Because it allows you to express what you'd like to express. If you're into that sort of thing, you may not be. You may simply want to sit quietly. Up to you. But in love, anything goes. Because you won't do anything to hurt anybody or yourself. Because why would you want to? The desire doesn't even arise. Love wants to love because love loves love. Peace wants to peace because peace is peace. So, be willing to meet yourself as you actually are, which may require cutting everything. In fact, it does require cutting everything and seeing what comes back. And many people may not come back, because most people only hang around you because you do the same drugs, because you tell the same story, because you have the same wound, because you share the same stuntedness and growth. And the minute you stop stunting yourself in growth, the minute you stop holding on to the crutches that you don't need anymore, the people who are insisting on not letting go of those things, they're going to try to get you to come back, or they're going to have to depart. The minute you stop drinking alcohol, people that drink don't want to be around you, and you don't really want to be around them. The minute you stop smoking pot, people that smoke don't really want to be around you, because they feel judged by you, and you don't really want to be around them because you see their head's not on straight. They're not clear. Especially people that drink, right? You know how that is. There's a lack of clarity there. Now, there's a time where when you're conscious and you're secure in consciousness, you can be around any kind of person because they can't touch you. You might rub them a little, because they might be a little weirded out by you, because you don't need anything in order to be freaking just open and fantastic and here and clear and just joyful. Most people can't feel anything unless they're taking some kind of substance. But when you're in consciousness, and therefore your energy is just totally on and alive, you don't need anything. In fact, you'd rather not have anything. Because then you're totally clear in your own energy, without any distortion. And in consciousness, what is valued is clarity of perception. And you see anyway that even if you're trying to use some hallucinogen or some entheogen to try to be a gateway or a vehicle into conscious awareness, it's only a vehicle that can get you at best up to the door if you're lucky. Most people, it shoots them off into some nether realm. But if you're lucky and you're conscious and you can maintain awareness and it gets you up to the door, you anyway have to leave it behind to walk through the door. Because when you walk through the door of perception, when you walk through the door of consciousness, you can't take anything with you. Not a thought, not a memory. Not an experience. You can't take the entheogen with you through the door of consciousness. You have to go alone as your bare soul. Nothing can come with you. So, it takes everything, the willingness to sacrifice everything to come into consciousness, but there's nothing better than this. There's nothing better than consciousness. There's nothing better than awareness. There's nothing better than being. There's nothing better than being in love with the source of creation, with peace itself. Nothing better than this. This is the basis. This is what it means to be human. This is the basis of being human. This is what's meant by being integrated. And it's not that you're done. Life is learning. You're constantly learning. But the base, which is consciousness, which is peace, which is awareness of God, God consciousness, Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness, knowing yourself as that's the basis of everything. And then every day, and then you're in relationship with everything and everyone. And then there's learning. What does learning mean? Learning means, right now, I'm learning. I'm looking, and so I'm learning. Learning doesn't mean you learn a little fact here and then a little fact there. That's psychological learning. That's a lesser kind of learning. That's obvious. You're going to keep on, you learn a language, you learn obviously, right? But learning on all the time means what? The sun is where it is. I see where the sun is. I see where the blanket is. I see where everything is. That's learning. And so if I want something, I know where to go to get it. That's learning. Somebody might come in and move something, and I have to see where it's moved in order to know where it is to retrieve it. Learning, right? Learning means awareness, attention of everything that is perceived. And as long as the brain is tangled up in its trauma story, that kind of learning is not really happening. And that's the kind of learning that's necessary to be in relationship, otherwise you hurt people. And that's why it's said that trauma begets trauma and hurt people, because they do. I know some people don't want to hear it. But if your mind, if you're not free to pay attention undividedly to what's here in front of you, then all you can do, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is cause pain, is hurt people. Because you're insensitive and inattentive. And when you're inattentive, you cause suffering. And so suffering goes with inattention, and love goes with attention. And so when you pay attention to yourself as you are, boom, then you can, if you stop deceiving yourself completely, you stop deceiving yourself and you let yourself see yourself completely as you are and have yourself completely as you are, then you see everyone and everything just as they are. No one can deceive you because you've stopped deceiving yourself. But if other people can deceive you, if you're worried about being deceived by others, it's because you're deceiving yourself. The minute you stop deceiving yourself, no one can deceive you. How can they deceive you? Because all deception is of the nature of mind. And deception of the mind is the most obvious thing. You can't hide it. But only if you're still telling yourself stories about how, well, this part of the mind is good and this part is bad. It's not. The whole thing is garbage. But as long as you're telling yourself a story about this part's good and that part's bad, then you're still caught in self-deception, and therefore everything will deceive you. And you'll be walking around with that, I don't know what's real and what's not. No, because you're not honest with yourself. But if you tell the truth, that the whole of the mind is garbage, it's a trash dump, it's a graveyard, so put it back, and you simply are here as indivisible consciousness, you're beyond deception. Nothing can trick you unless you let it trick you, and then you do it because it's fun. Like watching a movie or something, or having a silly conversation. So, this is what's necessary. This is what we need. We need to be able to, and we are able to do it. It's just, do you want to or not? And this is the, I don't want to say the test, but the gateway, if you will, of coming into what people are calling the new world, or, the new earth, or heaven on earth, or the golden age, or Sat Yuga, right, the age of truth, is the willingness to really walk through this door, through this gateway. And that means the willingness to be totally naked as a soul. And that can't be done as long as there's clinging to old narratives, to old stories, wanting to enact revenge, which you call justice. It's not justice, it's revenge. You want blood for blood. As long as that's, which means there's been no forgiveness. And obviously, as we've seen, that forgiveness, letting yourself off the hook, and therefore letting the whole world off the hook at the same time, means that past, present, and future are all forgiven, which means everything goes at once. No story. The story can't come with you. It doesn't mean that you won't remember the story. You will remember the story. I mean, you may forget it. I don't know. You might forget it. But it's okay. There's nothing wrong with memory. But if you're identified with memory, and with being a player in that field of memory, then the body stays locked in the traumatic cycle. The brain stays locked in a traumatic cycle. And then awareness of yourself as you really are cannot be known. And then there's no capacity to step into the eternal field of conscious awareness, which is what you are made of anyway, whether you know it or not. And so the glory of being human, the dignity, the majesty, the sovereignty of being human, is in knowing that. You have the right to know. Every human being has the right to know that they are inseparably in union with the source of creation. And no one has the right to take that away from anybody. And in fact, it can never be taken from you. The real thing can't be taken from you. And it's upon every human being to discover that directly for themselves. And this is the invitation that I offer you. To come into the direct realization of knowing who and what you really are, irrevocably. Peace.